At some point tonight you will lie down on a surface designed specifically for sleeping. A mattress, likely, springs or foam engineered to support the human body in specific ways, a pillow, bedding, a controlled temperature environment. And you will probably still not sleep perfectly. Here is something that should reframe that experience. For approximately 99% of human evolutionary history, none of that existed. Humans slept on the ground, on grass, on leaves, on animal skins, or on nothing at all. In ambient temperatures determined entirely by the local climate, in environments where predators were real and present. And the research on sleep quality in the few remaining traditional hunter-gatherer populations whose sleep patterns have been studied in detail shows something that should be uncomfortable for the modern sleep industry. They sleep extremely well. Not better in every measure, but in the fundamental measures, sleep efficiency, sleep architecture, the proportion of nights spent in sleep, the gap between traditional sleepers and modern ones is not what you would expect. The conventional wisdom about sleep on hard surfaces is that it produces pain, disrupted sleep, and long-term musculoskeletal damage. This is why mattresses exist. This is why sleep science devotes considerable attention to optimal sleep surfaces. The reality of ground sleeping in traditional contexts is more nuanced than this assumption suggests. Jerome Siegel at UCLA, whose research on sleep in traditional hunter-gatherer populations fundamentally changed sleep science's understanding of baseline human sleep, conducted field research with 3 groups, the Kung San of Namibia, the Hadza of Tanzania, and the Tsimin of Bolivia. None of these groups use mattresses in the conventional sense. All sleep on surfaces that are, by modern standards, hard. His findings were counterintuitive. These populations averaged 7 to 8.5 hours of sleep per night, within the range typically recommended by modern sleep medicine. Sleep efficiency, the proportion of time in bed actually spent sleeping, was high. Sleep onset after lying down was generally rapid. The pattern of insomnia that characterizes modern populations was largely absent. More striking, the populations showed almost no evidence of insomnia despite sleeping on surfaces that modern conventional wisdom would characterize as sleep-disrupting. Siegel's explanation touches on multiple factors: temperature, light exposure, physical activity levels, diet, and social sleeping patterns all likely contribute. But the surface itself, hard ground, appears to be less relevant to sleep quality than modern assumptions suggest. The human body evolved to sleep on the ground. The spine, the joints, the musculature of the back, these were shaped over millions of years by a sleeping surface that was not engineered for comfort by modern standards, but that was consistent and predictable. What the body is least adapted for is not hardness, it is inconsistency. The variable softness of a modern mattress combined with sedentary daytime habits that leave the musculature unprepared for any sleeping surface may be more disruptive than hardness itself. Archaeological evidence for prehistoric sleeping arrangements is limited by the poor preservation of organic materials, grass, leaves, animal skins, but what exists is revealing. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists discovered what is currently the oldest known bedding material, dating to approximately 77,000 years ago. The material consisted of layers of plant material, specifically sedge grass, arranged in a pattern consistent with deliberate sleeping surface preparation. Crucially, the plants showed evidence of having been selected for specific properties, including species with insecticidal properties that would have reduced parasite load in the sleeping space. The ancient humans who made this bedding were not simply lying on whatever was available. They were selecting specific plant material for specific reasons and arranging it deliberately. This is sophisticated sleeping environment management, the application of knowledge about plant properties to the practical problem of comfortable, parasite-free sleep. Later prehistoric sites across Africa and Europe show similar evidence of prepared sleeping surfaces, organized accumulations of plant material, sometimes charred in ways consistent with pest management through burning. Analysis of the Sibudu Cave bedding also revealed that the sleeping materials were regularly replaced or renewed, evidence of ongoing maintenance of the sleeping space over time. This was not a one-time improvisation. It was a habitual practice. The archaeological record of ancient sleeping is therefore not simply the image of people lying directly on bare earth. It is a record of populations with specific knowledge about which plants made better sleeping surfaces, who invested regular effort in maintaining those surfaces, and who understood that sleep quality was worth the investment of resources and attention. The ground was the base. What went on top of the ground was the result of accumulated knowledge and deliberate practice. And here is the comparison that changes how you think about it. The Sibudu Cave sleepers 77,000 years ago were sleeping on carefully selected, regularly maintained, insect-repelling grass beds in a protected cave environment. That is not primitive, that is practical expertise applied to a fundamental biological need. Here is the finding that the modern mattress industry would prefer you not think about too carefully. Research comparing ground sleeping to elevated sleeping in terms of musculoskeletal outcomes has produced a more complicated picture than the conventional narrative suggests. A 2015 study in the Journal of Chiropractic Medicine reviewed evidence on sleep surface firmness and back pain, finding that medium-firm surfaces produced better outcomes for chronic lower back pain than either very soft or very firm surfaces, but that the relationship was individual and context-dependent rather than universal. More interesting is the research on populations that transition from ground sleeping to elevated surface sleeping. Studies of populations in developing economies transitioning to bed sleeping have documented increases in certain types of musculoskeletal complaint that were less prevalent in the same populations when they slept on traditional surfaces. Physical therapist Philip Beach, whose research on what he calls archetypal postures challenges many assumptions of modern ergonomic thinking, argues that the body's musculoskeletal system is adapted for a repertoire of positions and transitions that includes floor-level activity, sitting on the ground, rising from the ground, sleeping at floor level that modern furniture and sleeping arrangements systematically eliminate. The relevance to prehistoric sleep is this. Ancient humans did not only sleep on the ground, they spent much of their lives at ground level, sitting, crouching, working, resting, socializing. The musculature and joint structure adapted to this pattern was prepared for ground-level sleeping in ways that a modern body, accustomed to chairs and elevated surfaces, is not. Ancient humans slept on the ground well not because they had no alternative, but because their bodies were adapted to it by a lifetime of congruent physical patterns. And beyond musculoskeletal adaptation, ground sleeping has one advantage that elevated sleeping categorically cannot provide: contact with the earth itself. Emerging research on what researchers call earthing or grounding, the direct electrical contact between the human body and the Earth's surface, suggests measurable physiological effects from this contact, including reduced cortisol and improved sleep quality in some studies. This research is preliminary, but it raises the question of whether something as simple as sleeping on the ground provides a physiological input that modern sleeping arrangements eliminate. The most significant difference between prehistoric sleeping and modern sleeping may not be the surface, it may be the social context. Ancient humans slept in groups. We established this in the discussion of snoring in the previous video, but the implications of group sleeping extend far beyond snoring management. Siegel's research on the Hadza, Kungsan, and Simane documents a sleep pattern that differs from modern sleep not just in duration and efficiency, but in its social embedding. In these populations, sleep is not a private, isolated activity bounded by specific hours. It is a social activity that happens within the ongoing flow of group life. People go to sleep at different times. People wake at different times. Brief awakenings during the night are common and are not experienced as insomnia. They are simply moments when someone is awake within an ongoing group context. The presence of other sleeping bodies, the ambient sounds of a camp, the social continuity of the sleeping space, all contribute to a sleep environment that is socially embedded in ways that modern solo sleeping is not. The isolation of modern sleeping, individual bedrooms, the removal of social sleeping context, the expectation of unbroken eight-hour unconsciousness, may itself be a driver of modern sleep difficulties. The sleep architecture that evolved in a socially embedded sleeping context may function less well in isolation. Research on co-sleeping, adults or family members sharing a sleeping space, consistently shows that, contrary to common assumptions, most people sleep better with a trusted partner than alone. Not necessarily undisturbed, but with higher subjective quality and lower rates of insomnia symptom reporting. The human sleep system appears to be calibrated for social context. Ground sleeping in its original prehistoric form was not just body on earth. It was body among bodies, embedded in a social group, in an ambient environment of familiar sounds and presences that the nervous system had learned to interpret as safe. The ground was the medium, the group was the context, and it was the group as much as the surface that made the sleep work. Siegel's research on traditional hunter-gatherer sleep has been influential, but his sample of 3 societies is small. Generalizing from these populations to prehistoric sleep universally requires caution. The earthing research is preliminary and methodologically mixed. While some studies show effects of electrical earthing on sleep quality and cortisol, the field has been criticized for small samples and methodological inconsistencies. It should not be presented as established science. The argument that modern musculoskeletal complaints are caused by elevated sleeping surfaces is contested. Back pain is multifactorial, and attributing it to beds rather than to sedentary lifestyles, obesity, or other factors is an oversimplification. The co-sleeping research shows benefits in some contexts, but co-sleeping arrangements are also associated with specific risks in others. The evidence is not uniformly positive. What is established? Traditional hunter-gatherer populations sleeping on traditional surfaces show sleep patterns within normal recommended ranges. Prehistoric sleeping surfaces were deliberately prepared rather than merely improvised, and social context appears to be a significant factor in sleep quality. So why did ancient humans sleep on the ground? Because the ground was there, because their bodies were adapted to it, because the grass and leaves and animal skins they arranged on top of it were the result of accumulated knowledge about what worked. And because the social group that slept around them provided a sleeping context that the nervous system recognized as safe in a way that isolation does not. They did not sleep on the ground because they lacked alternatives. They slept on the ground because the ground, prepared with knowledge and shared with a group, was sufficient. The mattress you sleep on tonight is a response to problems that partly emerge from other features of modern life: sedentary days, isolated sleeping, temperature-controlled environments that remove the natural light and temperature variation that calibrate the circadian rhythm. The solution addresses the symptoms. The original design did not produce the symptoms. Ancient humans slept on the ground. They slept well. Not always, not without disruption, not without the same biological vulnerabilities we carry. But well enough to survive, well enough to build everything that followed. One question. Have you ever slept on the ground, camping, or by accident, or deliberately? And how did it actually feel compared to what you expected? Drop it in the comments. If this changed how you think about something you do every night, hit like. And if you want to keep following these origin stories, subscribe. Next time, how did ancient humans survive without clean water? Not whether they did, they clearly did, but what the actual strategies were and what they reveal about prehistoric knowledge of water safety. See you soon.